Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome our guest today, Mandy Ginsberg. So, for those who are listening and have met their significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner on a dating app, maybe Tinder or Hinge, you probably have Mandy to thank. Mandy's a true trailblazer who transformed how more than half of people today find romantic connections through online dating and dating apps. As the CEO of Match Group after its 2015 IPO, Mandy led the company's expanding portfolio of dating apps, including Tinder, Match.com, OkCupid, and Plenty of Fish, while later adding Hinge to establish Match Group as the dominant force in online dating that owns over 45 dating apps and services. During her tenure, Mandy broke new ground as the first female CEO to conduct a comprehensive organizational pay audit to address gender wage disparities. Her leadership experience extends beyond Match Group, having served as the CEO of the Princeton Review in 2013 as well. Mandy holds a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley in Spanish and English literature. She also played on the women's soccer team, by the way, so shout out to that. And then went on to earn her MBA from the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton. Currently, Mandy also serves on the boards of Uber, ThreadUp, Universal Music Group, and Flow Health, while working as an operating partner at Advent International, a global private equity investment firm. Mandy, it is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Carly. Likewise. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm glad we're finally making it happen.
Exactly. It's been in the works. I'm so happy it's happening. So, Mandy, I didn't mention this in the intro, actually, but you were born and raised in Dallas, and you are still in Dallas today. Is that right?
Yeah, I've circled the globe a few times in the meantime, but yes, I made it back to Texas.
Amazing. So, Mandy, what I love to do, how I love to start off is I actually want to know, how were you as a child? Tell me a little bit about maybe 10-year-old Mandy. Were you a bit of a wild child? Did you, were you very studious? What did you like to do?
So funny, 10-year-old. I remember that year because I switched schools. I graduated from the elementary school to the big sort of middle school. I know I wore my hair in pigtails like this every single chance I got. And I was an athlete and I was super competitive. And I do think that at the time, maybe fourth, fifth grade, I was the fastest runner in the grade across boys and girls. So you can see and I think as I got older, I didn't really love rules. I still don't really love rules. And so as I got a little bit older, I certainly was known for optimize. I worked hard, but I like to optimize for fun.
Amazing. It also, it even reminds me of me, super competitive, fastest one in the grade, which was very important. And when did you actually start playing soccer? Because obviously you played in college as well.
Oh gosh. I can't even remember. I was toddlerish, 4, 5, 6, something like that.
So from my research, I've learned that you went to an all-girls school and you've been surrounded by powerful women in your life, especially growing up. You're one of 3 girls. Your mom obviously had an incredible influence on you. Tell me a little bit about that. How much of an impact did that kind of have into who you became?
I grew up I have the greatest dad in the world. He's still alive and he's amazing. And he thought his daughters could have been president or Miss America. He's sort of beloved by everyone. He's a big guy. And so anytime I go anywhere with him, everyone wants to give him a big hug. So needless to say, he was not the disciplinarian, but my mother was. So I grew up in a house with all girls with, the mom being the disciplinarian. We were definitely more afraid of her than ever my dad. And then, grew up playing soccer. And then I went to an all-girls school from the age of 5th grade. So right at that age 10 that we started off the podcast. And because I went to school with all girls, the president of the class, every person who had a leadership position in the school was a girl. And so I kind of felt when I watched that Barbie movie, I was like, oh my God, this was my life, because I lived in Barbie land for so long. And then when I got out into the real world, I was like, wait, are you kidding me? Men actually have influence and power. And so I was actually kind of shocked, especially sort of in the tech world where everyone growing up and around me in my life had been women and women leaders. And it was surprising to see that not everyone around me as I grew up and started my career was that way.
That's amazing. And you even mentioned, speaking of your father, he was very entrepreneurial. Is that right? So you almost got that little risk appetite from him. Would you say you had a risk A high risk appetite or?
I don't think I mentioned this to you when we first met, but my grandfather, who was such a serial entrepreneur, I mean, it was crazy. He created so many businesses. He didn't like running them, but he created them and ran them for a couple of years. And then they kind of like he'd go on to the next thing. But when I got my first kind of job and paycheck, he was so mad at me. He didn't talk to me for a month. And he said to me, which is so funny, I was like, Papa, what are you talking about? Most grandparents would love the fact that their kid has a job and could pay like their expenses and their life. And he said, you can always make more money working for yourself than anyone else. And he was mad at me. He said, you sort of sold out. Like, go create your own thing. What are you doing working for some paycheck?
That's very unique because I feel like you said, everyone, if anything, you hope your kid, has job security, you have a job, like all of that. Whereas it was the complete opposite. He was just like, why are you working for someone else? That's crazy.
I think, he was a Jewish immigrant. He was entrepreneurial. I mean, no one was going to hire him when he came to this country. And so I think that was part of the DNA. And same thing, I mean, my dad said no one ever hire him. So that's why he always had to work for himself. But I think it was kind of in the mentality of that generation, especially that generation of immigrants.
Wow. Okay. So ultimately, you decide to go to Berkeley. And this is what's super fascinating to me too, is you studied English and Spanish literature. At this point, what did you want to become? How were you thinking about, after college, post, in my career, this is what I want to be?
It's so funny. I don't think I ever thought about it. I don't know why. By the way, I always loved business. I always thought business was fascinating. I actually started, so I was very, very good at math, which I know seems strange that I had an English degree, but I was very, very good at math. And I started out at a calculus class my freshman year at Berkeley. I was one of the few women. There was 500 people in my class. I think I scored a 5 on the AP in calculus. I thought it was amazing. I was not. So I showed up at Berkeley and I took the calculus class. It was a prerequisite to electrical engineering, computer science. So it was like the EECS major. And I, for the first time ever in my life, got my butt kicked. And it was so funny. I had this guy who was this I'll never forget him. He's the TA. And he said, if I could give you an A for effort, I would. Because I was determined to do well. And it was the first C I ever got in my life. And weirdly, I wish I wouldn't have had that class that first year because I think I probably would have done something else. But I worked so hard and I barely, I made a C. It was crazy. And so I was like, okay, I can't do this. And also the class sizes were so big and at Berkeley, it's a big school. And the computer science departments are not going to handhold you. And so I just said, you know what? I love to read. And Maxine Hong Kingston, the writer, was my professor. And so I was like, this is unbelievable. And so we had access to so much, incredible professors. And I was like, I kind of like this. And so I decided I'll study English literature. I mean, it was just not by design, but kind of by mistake. And then I always spoke a second language. So that made sense. But it was a mismatch for what my true sort of, interests were.
It's so interesting because I actually think that is more common than we know. So for at least Stanford, I had the exact same experience for chemistry. I thought I was going to do pre-med, come from a family of doctors, did chemistry, and I was like, what the hell? I thought I was good at this. And studied my ass off and didn't, the results weren't there. So I was like, okay, you know what? Not for me. But it's so interesting because ultimately, that didn't necessarily navigate, where you go next. So meanwhile, I also mentioned you played soccer at Berkeley. I just want to know, what was the landscape like for women's soccer at that time? Because obviously we've seen where it is today. What was it like for you?
Oh my gosh, compared to what the sort of level you were playing in at Stanford was very different. I mean, this was 1988. And so did we have, no, we didn't even have email. So that was so weird. There was no such thing as email. So I didn't even know how I got recruited. I guess it'd been letters or coaches writing. I can't even remember. I do remember showing up and I was like, wow. Some of these players were some of the best players in the country. And we were top 4 in the country. And the speed and the size of these women, it was incredible. But again, it goes back to my calculus class. I had so much work ethic and I worked so hard and I would fight harder and be more competitive than anyone else. And at one point, my coach, who's such a great guy, he's actually a lawyer, an ex-lawyer who coached, and he said, I just need to keep you on the team to keep up the GPA because after my terrible calculus class, I actually did really, really well in school and I had a high GPA. And so he said, I've got to keep you on just for like, to pull up the team GPA. But, I think I had a lot of respect from the players of the team. I didn't start very much, but people just knew like my integrity, work ethic, team spirit was there, which is, by the way, very, very, and actually it helped me a lot over the next 3 decades of my career.
You took the words out of my mouth because I think those skills that at least I've already kind of seen it in, early professional career, but I think you're right. Those skills translate over, whether it's even, how to lead a team and like the different type of players and what they respond to and work ethic, competitiveness, all of it. So that's incredible. And I know after Berkeley, you ended up traveling a bit. You lived in Israel, you met someone there, and you ended up coming back for your first job in marketing at a PR firm. And what I loved, I read this somewhere where you realized you had this like eye-opening experience where you looked at your boss and you were like, I don't want to do what you're doing. Like, this is not for me. So I think a lot of people have this experience of, especially early in their career, of like, what am I supposed to do? Like, am I supposed to do this? I'm getting money. It's good. But should I leave? Should I look for something new? Do you have any advice in that element of how, what are good signs to know maybe it's not for you?
I mean, it's funny too, because there's lots of exceptions to this because in the early startup, you could be an incredible company, but you oftentimes work for a person, not a company. So pick your boss well, because you can learn so much and gain so much by working for someone who's incredible. It may be an okay company and vice versa. If you work for someone terrible at a phenomenal company, also can be not such a great journey. I will say it was so funny. So I worked at Edelman Public Relations. I think it's still the biggest independent public relations agency and marketing agency. I learned a lot. I was good at the client service. I was good at writer. I was pretty good. Like I was scrappy, but I was running a division of the business. So I actually ran the P&L pretty early in my career because we needed to get business in. We needed to make sure we kept the business that we had working. We needed to grow the business. So I was sort of always in that mentality of like, kind of like running a P&L in some ways at a sort of a smaller scale because I was inside of a marketing firm. But it's so funny. We worked really, really closely with Microsoft. So at the time, Microsoft is so early. It's always, I giggle when I talk about this because first of all, no one your age knows anything I'm talking about. But MSN had just acquired Hotmail, if you can believe. So that was a big deal. And I remember discussions about debating changing the name Hotmail. And the portals, MSN portal was a huge distribution engine and there's so much traffic at the time. And so we were working with MSN as part of the agency. And I remember when we'd have these big meetings, Steve Ballmer ran MSM at the time. So there's these big meetings with Steve Ballmer and there's a huge conference room and people would talk about like, what did we learn? What didn't go well? What went well? And as we were talking about everything from like pricing to, pricing/revenue generation to product and technology and and resourcing and roadmap, I realized I had a very small sliver of the pie and I actually liked understanding the bigger picture. And so that was the context where I was like, I don't really want to be my boss's boss. I don't want to run an agency. What I really want to do is get more into kind of more general management. That's what I thought was much more compelling, was like, how do you think about all the levers of a business?
So was it very natural for you of just being a leader and leading teams and managing teams? Or was there some type of learning curve that you had to actually go through?
I mean, I was never the best soccer player. So, I mean, I'm not even sure I was like the smartest person in the room. I do think that people who I worked with knew that I had their back and people liked working with me because I wanted people to succeed. Like I was pretty motivated by teams succeeding together. I mean, that doesn't always happen in teams where you don't know where you stand with your boss. You don't know if you're going to have opportunity. I don't think that people who worked with me or for me ever felt that.
So you're very transparent.
I was transparent and people knew that I wanted to win collectively. Like I wanted people to be successful because I also knew that they'd do the best work if they felt supported.
And what elements of marketing, why were you gravitated towards marketing in the early career? And then we'll get into business school and whatnot, but even you continued at I2 in marketing as well. So what kind of gravitated you towards that?
I mean, I2 was such an anomaly because it was more B2B. But I always loved consumer behavior. Like what's the psychology that gets someone to make decisions? What pixel do you put in front of someone that's going to get them to click? How do you think about buying behavior? How do you think about the emotional connection to with a product. I mean, I think I was always pretty fascinated by that and always just curious around like, I mean, even in the early days when we were working with MSN, it was really trying to understand like product market fit. How do we talk to people about a product? What's going to get people excited? What's a viral component? How, all those things like was super innate to me. And it was something that like I was just so inherently curious about.
Wow, I love that. You ultimately decide to go to business school, to go to Wharton. I want to know about your first week. From my understanding, you had so much going on in your life aside from going to business school. So tell me a little bit about this time in your life.
I don't even remember how much I told you about this, but I did that first week was crazy. Well, one, I was a mom, so I had a 1-year-old. So I had applied to Wharton, gotten in, but I had to defer because I had a baby. I had a 1-year-old when I started.
Yeah.
She was like 1 year and 1 month. So when I started, and within around the first week or two, my ex-husband said, I'm not happy. I'm going to move back to Israel. And so I actually subsequently, I mean, it all worked out. She's in medical school and she's super successful in life. And, her dad and I get along great. And that was 20 something years ago. But I did not realize that I would be starting Wharton with a 1-year-old as a single mom. So that, I remember that time because I mean, it was like an oh shit moment where I was like, oh my God. I actually went to the bursar to try to get my money back. And they were like, what are you talking about?
So in your mind, you were even like, you know what, I can't do this right now. Like, let me try rescind it, but you couldn't.
I was like, there's no way. I mean, this is not what I thought I was signing up for. But the funniest thing is the first week, 2 things happened to me, which I was like, oh my God, I'm in the wrong place. What am I doing here? I mean, this is not for me. So I met a guy in my cohort and I said, why are you here? What do you want to do? And he said, I want to be the CEO of a Fortune 50 company. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, first of all, I was like, I understand if you're like, I was super excited about being an entrepreneur and I want to start this, or I'm really passionate about, I don't know, like oil and gas or something, but like, or I'm really interested in banking and transaction, but I want to be a CEO of a Fortune 50 company. I was like, okay, I actually should go back and look up and see what he did in his career. But I thought that was goofy. And I was like, if that is the way people think and act, I'm like, this is not for me. And then people kept saying they wanted to be in iBanking. And I was like, oh my God, it's so weird that everyone wants to be in internet banking. They were talking about investment banking, of course, which I was like, oh my God. And at some point I'm like, that's so strange that everyone loves internet banking. And a friend of mine's like, don't say that out loud to anyone else. I was like, okay, why? They're like, because they're not talking about internet banking. So I mean, by the way, I knew what investment banking was, but like, I wasn't in the sort of like the slang of kind of the business world. Now, I kind of put my head down. I had an incredible learning team and it ended up being some of the best 2 years of my life because I think I did not have as much fun as everyone else, but I think it just gave me the credibility and the opportunity to put my hat in the ring on jobs and opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
And did you, going into business school, aside from everything else that's happening in your life, did you have a concept of what you want to get out of it? Were you like, I want to come out of it in 2 years and, break into this industry? Or how were you thinking about that?
I had a sister who went to Wharton and her friends were like doing such cool things. And so as I started talking to them, one of them was like running like the San Francisco Symphony or opera, I think. Another one was working at a startup. I mean, their lives and their stories and what they were doing was so fascinating. And I thought, my God, I mean, if they can go on and by the way, they were all changing career paths. Like, so they had been consultants or they had, worked in South America. And then, this was really their opportunity to kind of like shift and choose a different path. And I had been, at the time, I was a little bit older. I was 29. So I'd been working 7 years and mostly in sort of marketing discipline, a couple of years in Israel and the rest in San Francisco. And so I really was looking for how to like kind of broaden my career. And so I just looked at their paths and I'm like, they are doing such cool stuff. I want to do that. So I just sort of saw it as like truly like opening up doors and opportunities that I wouldn't have sort of the vantage point of.
And it's funny because, I mean, you say this lightly now, right? And even as I said it, but you had a 1-year-old as a single mom in business school for 2 years, 1 to 3 years old, which, I think from most people's perspective, that's a very, crazy time if you were not doing anything other than taking care of your kid. So looking back at that experience, does it give you confidence? Like, how did you do that really? Like, was it more just your work ethic? What do you attribute it to, and what do you take away from that?
I mean, in some ways, it was like great. It was the best thing that ever happened to me is honestly someone kind of leaving and me having to deal with all this stuff. Someone said to me, I don't know, maybe like 6 months into school, I was with my daughter and I was at like maybe a family party at Wharton. I mean, this dates me. This is, in 1999 or 2000. And this guy said to me, oh, what cohort is your husband in? And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, I don't have a husband. And he's like, well, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm the student. What
Wow.
are you talking about? And so, I thought that was interesting that like, gosh, I mean, not many people are facing what I'm facing. And in fact, it's so funny because all my buddies from Wharton now, especially as they had kids, are like, oh my God, how did you do this? Like we now know what you did at Wharton. I was like, yes, I know. But I think that in some ways, I mean, I didn't have a choice. And, you don't know how strong you are until you get tested. I mean, I'm sure I like cried. I cried. I didn't eat. I was so stressed. And then I had a really great family. So I did summer internships in Dallas, and my mom helped at the time with my daughter. And I'm very lucky that way. But you just don't know. And then I sort of got through those few years and I was like, you know what? A lot of things are not going to seem that hard after I did that. And that goes for a lot of the sort of extreme experience I had in life is like, at the core, if you can like get your shit together and figure out a way to like be a good parent and a good role model, then, and I can say that now because my daughter and I've talked a lot about, 25 years, this is 25 years ago. So about, those early years and how we were these little buddies together. And I'm not sure how much she remembers, but she does remember like being my little buddy and us kind of figuring out together.
I love that. I love that. And I read somewhere actually where during this time where like that guy, even said to you, is your husband here as a student, your mom, her advice was just deal with it, right? Like just do it.
I mean, you don't have a choice. Yeah, you don't have a choice. My mom was a lot like, stop your complaining and just deal with your life. And by the way, like she was also like, and if it's unsurmountable, do something else.
Right. So you ultimately end up at I2 Technologies. And the reason why I want to mention this is it turns out to be arguably maybe one of the most important, elements of your life. You met your husband, your now husband, your best friend, Shar, who you've worked with, for many, many years. Tell me about this time. What made it so special? And did you know it was special at the time?
Well, this was 2001 when there were literally no jobs in the market. I think I had $104,000 worth of debt, which is a ton of money now. 25 years ago, I mean, it was a ton of money. And so, and I knew, I literally was like, okay, I have to pay for my daughter's education. There would be times where I'd be like, hey, mom, dad, can I come eat with you guys like 5 days a week this week? I was like an adult, but I knew that between like my debt and my expenses as a single mom, I had a lot to manage. Frankly, I just needed a job. I did not care what kind of job. And I had done a summer internship at I2 Technology, which was a B2B software company, supply chain management company. It was so like out of my wheelhouse, but I didn't care. I had done a summer internship that summer in Dallas because frankly, I was solving to be in Dallas because I knew I was a single mom and I needed I needed to live at home at my parents' home. I think I was 30 at the time. So, I was not a kid. I thought this was just a quick stopping ground until like kind of the market got better. I was there for 5 years, but it was kind of a remarkable company. It was a high flyer in the stock market before I got there. And I was sort of the beginning of the end. I mean, the stock was really, it was sort of, it was not great. Ultimately ended up selling. But we had to restate our earnings. It was challenging. There was a lot of stuff that was going on. It was like lots of layoffs and, we had to make a lot of changes in the company. I ran a division of marketing and then I ultimately ran all of marketing. But I met my husband and then honestly, I met just incredible high quality people that ultimately joined me at Match and were really one of the big sort of reasons that Match became what it was today.
And did you follow your advice about working for great people? Or for you, it was mainly like, I just need a job. But why did you stay for maybe that long time? Did you ever consider leaving earlier?
When you're a single mom and you've got like a 1 to 5 year old, you're also like trying to constantly weigh, how like I've got to balance a little bit of like my career with just the practicalities of life. That felt long. I mean, I'm not sure I would have stayed there, although certainly like I kept getting more responsibility. It was really interesting. We did have to restate earnings. I was working closely with the PR and IR team. So I was learning a lot at the time, and it was a great team for a period of time. I will say the last year, I mean, as everyone was at these type of companies where things start getting harder and harder, I had been kind of looking for a new role, and just was dumb luck that I ended up stumbling into Match.
Okay, so let's get into Match. Tell me a little bit about what ultimately, got you into chemistry.com first and then Match. How did you find it?
I had two different people call me about the Match job, and like random. Like one was for a high school friend and one was a business school friend. Because Match.com was based in Dallas, eHarmony, some of these companies, people don't even know what they are anymore. eHarmony was around. It was sort of killing Match. Match came up with a flanker business to really go attack eHarmony called Chemistry. They hadn't even launched it. They hadn't launched it, but they wanted someone who they were willing to make a bet on a person who really understood marketing and consumer marketing. And Dallas, Texas in the time was not a hotbed of like hiring for consumer internet marketing people. I talked to a woman who's amazing, a recruiter who every year on Valentine's Day, I will reach out to her and be like, thank you for changing my life. Because that was the first day I started. Not really the first day I started at Match, but like my official first day at Match was on Valentine's Day, which was very fitting. But she did change that phone call, changed my life. They took a chance on me. They hired me to be the general manager of Chemistry, this business. It was this flanker business. It was the serious minded. At the time, Match was the hookup site, if you could believe it. And eHarmony was more the marriage serious minded site because there was no apps. And Chemistry was supposed to be the answer to Match's serious minded person. So we launched Chemistry in 2006 when I came on board. I think it had launched, I think we launched it like this. In fact, it was probably a year ago. I mean, at the same time, like the first or second week of January. So in 2006. And so that was my entry point into the dating category.
From my understanding, though, it's beyond marketing, right? Like, isn't it? It's from the ground up. It's essentially being, a founder. Or am I wrong? Like, what elements was it putting on a founder hat, and was that something that was daunting to you, or was it more of like, let me just, I could put on the marketing creativity hat?
I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, it's actually kind of amazing that they made a bet on me. So I actually don't even know why they did, because I really did have like kind of the marketing piece, but I didn't understand product and technology. I didn't understand operations and customer care and a million of the things that like we had to deal with. And building the business, because ultimately it was like 25 people, but I'm not sure, it was maybe 10 of us or 8 of us when I first sort of got hired and started. We had the benefit of being able to market to Match people. So that was a lot of free marketing. So that was a huge sort of safety blanket to be able to kind of migrate users. We found that users would pay for both too, which was pretty fascinating. But a couple months in, I knew I needed a strong product and technology leader. In fact, I had a great tech guy there, but he's like, we need a good product person, because I can be a great tech person, but I need a partner on the product side. So I called Shar Dubey, who was the head of product strategy and a good buddy of mine at I2, never, ever thinking that she would be interested. And I said, hey, Shar, I really don't know what I'm doing here. And I'm trying to figure out all these pieces, but I think I can get like all the sort of like HR, hiring the team, operations, marketing, all that stuff. But I just need someone who's an engineer to understand like the drive product engineering. And by the way, it's a product-led business. And so she calls me back a couple of days later. I kid you not. And she's like, I'll do it. And I was like, oh. I said, do you know how to? She's like, I could figure it out. And I said, okay, great. It's like, I just wish I could go back and play that conversation, because sometimes I'll say, did I remember it that way? She's like, yeah. And the weird thing about Shar is that like, I wouldn't say she's the hugest risk taker, but when it came to like very big decisions in her life, one, her husband, who I'm close with, and then this job, she took these like huge swings. And so anyway, she went to interview with the people at Match, the CEO at the time, the COO, and they were like, I mean, you can hire anyone you want, but are you sure you want to hire her? Because she doesn't seem like she has any experience. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm sure we can figure it out. But it was so funny. When we were going through this hiring process, that is when I got a cease and desist letter saying that the company I too was suing me. When I told my boss that, he's like, that's great. She must be really good. Who else can you hire? But the cease and desist letter was so bizarre because it was a non-solicitation. It was based on a non-solicitation agreement. And I actually didn't solicit her, just to be clear. And it was a dating business versus a supply chain software business. There was no competitive nature at all. And the kicker is my husband was still at the company and had kind of a bbig role, a big revenue generating role at the company. And so I couldn't believe it. I was like, "Are you guys crazy?" It wasn't even my husband. I think we were getting married like a couple months later. So now is my fiance. So we were in this weird situation where the company, I subsequently found out that in a board meeting, the new CEO, who I didn't know as well as the chairman, said, the next person who hires someone, I'm going to personally bankrupt. And I was the next person. so it was really interesting. And I don't know. I was so proud of myself how I handled it 20 years later, because I was like, damn, I was pretty good, because I reached out to the CEO and I said, this is silly. Like, my fiance works there. Let's meet for a drink. I'd love to talk to you about it so we can work this out. And he showed up to the bar with a piece of paper saying that if you will sign on the dotted line that your husband will work here for another, 2 years or something, then we will drop the lawsuit. And I said, you can't, I will never ask him. I mean, it was crazy. And so I said, my knee-jerk reaction was like, okay, one, I can't believe you're treating an employee that way. And two, I could never start a marriage where I'm asking him to do something like this. It's like, this is unacceptable. And so I said, we'll think about it, but I just don't know how this is going to work out. And he quit the next day. Yeah, it was fine. I mean, we're all worked out fine. So.
And then you probably you can get, anyone from I2 then.
I think 366 days later, I hired a lot more people from I2.
Amazing.
Because I did sign an agreement that I would not hire anyone for a year.
It's funny, by the way, because you described Shar as, she took this risk not knowing whether she can actually do it. And you even asked that question. And it's funny because you did a very similar thing. You didn't, there were a lot of elements that you didn't know, but you're like, yeah, I can do it. I'll figure it out. And so it seems like you guys actually have that same mentality, if you will, of like, we will figure it out. It's okay.
I mean, also don't forget we were young. We had no money. We had nothing to lose. What's the worst that could happen? You'll just get another job. And this one was exciting and fun, and we felt like the stakes were fairly low.
Then you were offered, you then became the CEO of Match.com. So not yet Match Group, but Match.com. I'm curious, in that time, did you ever, have the mentality from your grandfather, your dad, of saying like, you know what, I'm going to go start my own thing now. Like, I kind of got a taste of it. Did you ever have that instinct to do it?
I mean, the weird thing is, well, one, we were part of Interactive Corp, and IAC had a strong, kind of ownership culture where the management team would kind of own the business. So X% of the business, whatever it would be, like 20% of the business would be owned by the executives in the business. And so it was a great incentive structure that they created for these sort of operating businesses. So in some ways, that was sort of the DNA of IAC. And so though I didn't go off and run something, I felt like this was my baby. There's a lot on, there's a lot of upside. There's a lot riding on this. And so I think they really tried to incent and think about motivating entrepreneurs. So I think it solved some of that. But I, frankly, I don't know what I would have done with my knowledge now, going back 20, 30 years, would I have done something different? The startup thing was fun. I actually loved even more taking a $200 million business and scaling it. That was great. I mean, that was really, really fun and hard, but really, really fun.
You got a taste of like what stage gives you the most energy, the most excitement.
And we could just unlock so much opportunity, and winning is always fun. I mean, Chemistry was a $25 million business and 25 people. Match was a $200 million business with 250 people, and it had not been growing for 18 months. When we started to figure out pretty quickly the unlocks to be able to sort of figure out how to drive growth, that was fun. and ultimately what happened, which is even crazier, is that, so this is now 2008. I know this because of when my children were born. So I started in 2006, 2008, my daughter was born. I was on maternity leave. Shar was being borrowed while I was on maternity leave to go help match and figure out what the problem was. And Char's like, we don't have a product problem. We've got a leadership problem. So she told my boss at the time, you need to go get Mandy to run match. And so, because she's like, we can manage product and tech, but we've got a fundamental, like, we got an overarching leadership challenge in terms of like everything from hiring to motivation to holding accountability to like putting like all the stuff that you sort of see. And it's funny, I just talked to this guy today, so now I feel bad, but I need to tell him this story. That's okay, he can hear it. But he was British and he was very funny and very self-deprecating in that British way. And he's like, how's the baby? This is like 3 weeks after the baby was born, maybe 2. I mean, it was a little baby. And he's like, I just wanted to come over and check on you and see the baby. I was like, you do? I was like, okay. And he had kids, so it's not like he was like a warm, fuzzy baby kind of guy. And so he like showed up to my house, which is also kind of weird now if I think about it, with like this little baby. And he's like, yeah, baby's cute. We'd like for you to come back and run match. Would you like to do that? Can you start in like a week? And it was hilarious. And I love my kids, didn't really love babies. And so I was like, yes, get me out of this place, which I have to give them a lot of credit because I was on maternity leave when they asked me to run this $250 million business. And I mean, my reaction was not like, yes, get me out of here. It was like, are you sure? I mean, that's a big business. There's 250 people. Like, are you sure I can do it? Which is silly because I probably shouldn't have said that, but I really did not think I could.
Yeah.
That was a big leap. And I didn't have a ton of time between like getting up to speed and being a GM. I mean, it's just a 2-year period. So we went from like 0 revenue to 25 million. And then all of a sudden I jumped from 25 million to 250, which felt huge at the time.
Wow. That's a crazy story, by the way, of just like coming to your home, asking you to be the CEO of Match.com. So from the outside, it seems you have this confidence, right? And like you now, looking back, it's probably even easier. But did you ever actually have, the so-called imposter syndrome where you're like, why I can't do this? Like this, how do I do this? And should I not do this? How did you deal with that if it came up?
I know I always hear the imposter syndrome. It's not like I think I kind of knew my weaknesses and I knew I couldn't change them. And so I was always nervous I would fail. But I kind of was always, now the difference is, don't forget, I still didn't have any money. And I know that sounds silly, but like, when you like, don't own your house, you don't like, and so there's not so much writing on it. And I think I was like, what's the worst that can happen to me? I'll get another job. What's the worst that can happen? And so I had this little bit of like, I did have insecurity for sure. And I mean, a lot of us do. Some of us hide it better than others. I mean, there's some that maybe don't have insecurity, and not everyone's perfect at everything. But I just think that I just kind of kept going like, I mean, really, how big really of a risk it is. And also like, I think when you have this mentality with like the 2 generations above you as immigrants are like, we left everything. We started from scratch. Like, what are you people whining about? And I think in my back of my head, I'm like, I mean, it's not that hard. Like, I'll just get another job. I mean, I can always make money doing something. So, but that I did have confidence in. I'm like, I can always figure out something to make money.
And Mandy, at this time too, your mother passed away from cancer. Is that right? Around this same time?
She died in 2004. So she died, I was still at I2. And so she died, really before any of the dating space happened. So yeah, she didn't get to see any of it, sadly, because she would have been shocked and surprised and I'm sure proud.
Very proud. I have no doubt. A Jewish mother,
Yeah.
matchmaking the whole world.
But mostly surprised and shocked because she was just, I mean, she was so different than me and she just thought like you're a handful to manage is like as a parent. Mostly because I didn't like rules. Actually, it was not so much her rules. I just didn't like any rules. And that for someone who's very rules-based, like my mother, she's just like, I mean, she just couldn't imagine how you could wake up and not make your bed. I'm like, but why would I make it? I'm going to get back into it. So these are like the constant battles.
Totally. So, okay. I want to get to Match Group, but you, like I said, you had a stint as a CEO of the Princeton Review. So what made you decide to leave Match.com, join the Princeton Review, and what was challenging about that time, kind of going from one industry to now ed tech and education?
Well, it's a little bit misleading because we were all part of the same company. So actually, I wasn't changing my boss.
Got it. Okay.
I think at the time, I had spent now, I think at that point, maybe 7 years in the dating space, which felt like a long time. And I was like, oh, okay. Spent a lot of time at Match. We had a lot of things changing in the company. I sort of said, you know what? And again, IC and Match was highly acquisitive. And we started looking at, look, is there ways that we can take all the learnings that we've gained? Because the Match story was actually pretty interesting because we were able to turn around the business in a pretty short order. It was like that 18 months of decline before I started, turn around the business. And because it was doing so well based on cracking marketing, cracking product market fit, because we changed the product quite a bit at that time, and the growth rates were there's real momentum in the business, it gave us the ability to start doing M&A. So we bought a business in Europe. We bought OkCupid at the time, was like a really huge bet because it was a very different type of business model at the time. We bought Plenty of Fish. So there, like we gained a ton of momentum with all these sort of best practices and then leveraging those best practices across all these other businesses. So at the time, there was a thesis that like, okay, if we've done it in dating and we'll continue to sort of drive growth in dating, can we do it in other categories? And we looked at a company called Tutor.com. Tutor.com was a marketplace of tutors, which is on-demand marketplace, kind of like a Uber for tutors. And Shar and I at the time, I think my daughter was maybe like a sophomore or junior, and my older one was sophomore or junior in high school. Shar's always been really fascinated by education. We're like, let's jump into the sort of the M&A discussions and see if we think that we thought we were burning out a little bit on the dating space. We didn't realize we were going to jump back in after a couple of years. And so I still had the same boss. I still had the same FP&A. I still had the same, it was more around like Princeton Review was going to be our test kind of industry of like, can we take all these practices into different industries and could education be one of them? So Shar and I left along with our CTO, who's amazing. And we bought Tutor.com. We bought Princeton Review. And then we bought a little college counseling businesses. And we thought if we can help people improve their grades, do great in test scores, and then ultimately help them get into college, we could actually really help that path to college in a much more affordable way than people are doing today. So that was a thesis.
And overall, when you look at new opportunities that can come up, I'll take away, what's going on in life and whatnot. What are some key factors that you look at, whether it's the market, the people on the team, the culture, like what are some of the key factors that come into mind for you to be like, this is an interesting opportunity?
So we can talk about different ones. I mean, I think the Princeton Review is amazing because it had a great brand, but it was very old school. It's kind of brick and mortar still and not a great technology platform that was very scalable and really hadn't invested in the content product experience in a way that would really resonate, we thought, with teenagers at the time. So we thought, wow, this feels like it could be a very, very big unlock. And Princeton Review had never really done big scaled advertising. I don't think they had advertised on radio. They certainly hadn't done television advertising. They hadn't done advertised on the online platforms, including Meta. This time it wasn't Meta, it was Facebook. And so I'm like, okay, can we take all these different practices, not just on the product and technology side, but on the distribution side? Because we know this audience, like we know moms, not just because we were moms, but because the Match.com business really catered to an older audience. So we're like, we know how to target those people, and can we deliver a great product to the moms who are making the decisions for most of these products? And so, look, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. You look at lots of businesses, and for unlocks, we do it at Advent and other investment companies all the time. I mean, I think that product market fit and figuring out, like, are there skills that Shar and I, for example, can really bring when it comes to like product and product scalability and when it comes to distribution and marketing. So those are the things that we look at. Because, at the end of the day, like we didn't run complicated factories, we ran consumer internet subscription products. And that's the other thing that we liked, we looked at quite a bit is like, are there other businesses that really, we were the first businesses that established that young people will pay for subscriptions, which no one thought we could, for Tinder, that, young people paid.
It's something, even as you're talking, I've noticed that, yes, you mentioned how you have a big risk appetite in terms of whether you accept a job, go to a company and whatnot. But even as an operator, you take a lot of risks. Like, even like you said, like the Tinder subscription model, or I went into even the archives of chemistry.com. You guys put out this like marketing campaign against eHarmony. That was kind of a little bit, taboo, or if you will, like rejected by eHarmony. It was pretty out there. So it seems like it comes into, how you even lead and what you do even within the company.
Did I tell you the story about the chemistry ad? I don't even know if I
No.
told. So they were doing a big story, like, I can't remember, 60 Minutes or 2020. It wasn't Barbara Walters, clearly, but it was like someone like that. I'll think of it in 2 seconds. So anyway, they were doing a story on Barry, and there were not that many female executives at IAC at the time. It changed over time, but they asked me to come and like present to them in a meeting that they would film. So we went and I'm the worst actress. My boss at the time said, well, let's not do a fake meeting. Let's actually present a really interesting ad campaign that we'd been working on. And the idea behind the ad campaign was that eHarmony at the time we thought was one of the most discriminatory businesses in America, because they didn't let people who were looking at same-sex relationships join, and they would reject you. And you had no idea why they rejected you. And so we created this very funny campaign, tongue-in-cheek, about being rejected by eHarmony. But at the time, and I can't believe I'm forgetting the reporter's name because she's very famous, but at the time we pitched it to Barry. He actually didn't like it. I mean, he didn't like it because he's like, why don't you talk about what you stand for, don't poke the other guy. And she thought it was a brilliant campaign, because she's like, chemistry is this tiny little business and you're going up against this behemoth, and this is like such a great flanker brand campaign. And oh, by the way, it was the first campaign where we ever put a gay man in a television ad. It actually was the first gay couple that ever was on an advertisement in television in America. And so we ended up becoming kind of like heroes. It was amazing. And that campaign picked up a lot of momentum. And so, look, I sort of thought like it'll work, because Barry didn't love it. Barry Diller didn't love it. I was like, it's going to either work and things are going to be fine, or it's going to fall over and I'm going to get fired and I could go find another job. What do I have to lose? But it worked. And it was really, actually, it created a lot of the momentum in the early days of chemistry, and it really put chemistry on the map. And frankly, it really, really put a lot of pressure on eHarmony, because they had to then turn around and create 2 different sites, one gay site, one straight site. So then we, of course, put up a campaign that was called, it was amazing. It was like the gays and the straights that we put and on top of a drinking fountain. So I was like, God, you guys are just giving us too much ammunition. So it was very smart at the time. And so I think that sort of confidence gave us the ability to take some risks and get a better sense of like, what people were looking for in marketing. That was probably, okay, Cupid had a lot of very controversial moments in their ad campaign, but that one was fun because we really could go after eHarmony. We felt like we were on the right side of like business history on that one.
Right. Yeah. Like values wise, it was right. I love that. That's an amazing story. So, okay, let's go to Match Group now. You become the CEO of now a public company. What was the biggest difference for you now that you're, of a public company versus the Match.com experience that you had?
So before I became CEO of Match Group, I was the head of all the North America businesses. So I was running portfolio. It was a big portfolio. It didn't include Tinder. I was starting to not just be the CEO of one business, but like to be the CEO of CEOs, which by the way is very, very different, because I'm such a roll up my hand kind of person, and a roll up my sleeves kind of person. And to then manage CEOs that are doing that it's just a different, it's a different beast. I actually miss the rolling up your sleeves.
What was the hardest element about that? Like leading CEOs rather than being able to, get dirty and work on things?
A big challenge was really on resource and asset allocation and financial investment. So think about it, like everyone wanted marketing investment or product investment, engineering investment. And so we had to make sure that we were making the right sort of like ROI on Like, if we had $10 million to spend right now, do we spend it in Japan or on Tinder, or do we just spend it in the US or on Hinge or on OkCupid? And so it's like having your kids like fighting for all the resources. Like, mom, why do you let your sister, my sister, you gave her this and you didn't give me that. And it was like, we had to make sure that we had real business rationale. I mean, the benefit, even though that, we had all these different CEOs, it was all one public company. And so we're all hopefully, stroking the boat or rowing the boat in the same direction. But that part was hard because you want to motivate and engage people, but don't forget we were competitive brands. And so that's where it would have been very different if one was an industrial company and one was a dating company and one was an education company. That was not the case. And so people really were, the CEOs were competing against each other and being forced to collaborate on some level as well.
The way you mention it now, it's actually such an interesting dynamic that you had to work with, because you're right, like they are competitive. Like, were you able to build a culture, like a camaraderie, or was that not even a possibility in terms of culture?
It's hard because the winning team is always like, oh, those, old stupid people, like we're so smart and brilliant, depending on what was sort of the highest growth rate company. But, I think that I was there for so long. I hired so many people. There was like a DNA. And also like, I do think people trusted me. I've been there so long. And between me and Shar, we knew so much about the business. And so it was not like someone coming in that was like questioning decisions that got made. I will tell you, before I ended up leaving, we never were the company, ironically. We did these like big get-togethers in the summer in Dallas, which people were like, why would you bring us together in 103 temperature? Which was always like a head scratcher to like people from Paris or Japan. They're like, this is terrible. And we had a big event at a really kind of hot, steamy, sweaty lake just outside of Dallas. And they're like, this is the worst thing in the entire world. But we never really spent a lot of time bringing the leadership team together. One, I knew everyone, so we would like collaborate and talk, but it was expensive. It was time out of the office. It was just not in our DNA because we were so heads down all the time. But I brought a group together for like a great 3 or 4 day offsite. And it was awesome because I think that what happens is when you're in a competing culture, you sort of forget how much you either have in common or you forget the person that you're negotiating against for the dollars. And so I just think it's really important to spend the time having people get together, get to know each other, because despite that you might have one business that's doing really well and one business that's not, believe me, it might be the next year what's the opposite. And you want there to be best practice sharing within those organizations.
Absolutely. And during this time, Mandy, there still is pretty big gap between female CEOs and male CEOs, right? Of public companies, in general in tech. Did you ever feel, I want you to talk about, I've read that you didn't feel lonely because you had Shar, like you guys were kind of this like dynamic duo. But did you ever have a support outside who understood what you were going through? How did you kind of seek that support? Because it was so rare, like you couldn't really lean on someone at another company who's going through a similar thing.
No, look, I was in YPO, the CEO organization, and in my forum, this small group, it was very evident that everyone felt very lonely, and that was the whole sort of point. I didn't feel that way. Look, Shar and I had a very unique relationship, and in fact, when I became CEO of Match Group, I actually pitched that we become co-CEOs, and they're like, that doesn't work. It actually would have worked, and essentially, it's how we ran the business. And she subsequently became CEO after me when I left. But we had such a unique relationship, not like the personal relationship, which was great, but also our skill sets were so different from each other. Like on a Venn diagram, it would be like, barely overlapping each other. And it's like if you could shove both of us together, we'd be the perfect CEO because it gave us so much leverage. Because she would deal with a lot of the things on like sort of the tech side, product side. I would deal with a lot of the marketing, operations, HR, external stuff. And also like you have so many direct reports. So I'm like, okay, will you talk to so-and-so and I'll talk to so-and-so. And then like, let's like circle back to make sure that we're in alignment. It felt like there was two of us. There were two of us. And so it was really remarkable. But I think more than that, like one, it's not that the team saw just one woman who was a mom who was running a business, but they saw two of us. And that brought like a level of, I think, I don't know, it exponentially, I think, impacted the organization on how we approached management, our personal lives. And then, there was tremendous amount of respect. People loved Shar and the organization. And I just think that I could see that people totally liked working with the two of us. So in these situations, sometimes you can see where someone's undermining the other one or they're trying to circle around the other one. It just, that never was in the realm of how we ran things. We were really incredibly aligned, and it was awesome because the stuff that she was good at and loved to do was very different than the stuff that I was good at and loved to do.
I love that. That's amazing. And I mean, you even mentioned that I think having those two presences also trickle down into even hiring great women. Like they see that and they want to strive to be that. So I think there's like a really powerful effect that goes on there. So I mentioned in the intro how you conducted a pay audit. Talk me a little bit through that. What was the drive to do that, and what were some of the findings from it?
Well, it's funny because like very early on in our careers, as we were going through the end of year reviews and looking at bonuses, equity, et cetera, just from the early days. I mean, not when like there was such a thing as pay audits. Shar and I realized that most of the people who would bang their fist on the table or be kind of squeaky were not women, which was wild. I mean, and you kind of alluded to it that, I had a mom who's like, if you want something, open your fucking mouth. Like, it's like, I'm not sure she said fucking, but she said, open your mouth and ask.
Yeah.
But that's not, I mean, that's more unique, I think. That's certainly not what we saw. There was a woman who was incredibly valuable, and she just is not a self-advocator. She didn't and by the way, Shar hates asking for stuff, and she'd always tell me that. I was like, I have no problem asking for the both of us. But this one woman was like, she was so talented, and we made sure that she was compensated for her contributions to the company, not at the expense of because she never asked for it, she could have easily gotten overlooked, but she was so incredibly valuable. And so we spent a lot of time actually because this one woman saying let's just make sure that just because they're not loud that they're not getting paid. Anyway, over time, and the business got, much bigger, we thought we were doing this, and we actually paid special attention to make sure that there was real equity based on value that people were providing, because it's a meritocracy at the end of the day, that we believe that you pay people for delivering great results. And so we decided to do a pay audit. Frankly, I can't remember why. Maybe the head of HR said we should, and I was like, let's do it. But the thing is about this pay audit, I had actually gone to a conference where I heard, I think Salesforce or someone did this pay audit. They felt that there was a real discrepancy, and they knew that they had to put real dollars to address the discrepancy in pay. And I told my head of HR, I'm like, if we do this, we better talk to comp committee because we got to put our money where our mouth is, and we actually need to make a change. And we found that actually we didn't need to make a change. So much so that the auditors, the compensation consultant auditors came in and they almost didn't believe it. So they had to go kind of back through the data a couple times. There was one area, it was weird. It was like accounting where there was a delta because I think there had been a lot of women who had been there a long time and the men had been newer. So there was something that we're like, let's go fix that. But it was so small relative to the overall business, especially when it came to product and technology.
Yeah.
Now, that said, do we have enough technologists or engineers who are women? No. Do we have enough product people that were women? No. But there was a level of equity and fairness, especially when it came to thinking about it for gender. And I think that's because of who we were and how we approach things.
On that notion of, like you said, men tend to, bang the table, get what they want, whatever, ask for what they want, at least, on the surface level, rather than women. And for you, it comes more naturally. But what advice do you have for women where it doesn't come more naturally? Even maybe it is just embodying the mindset of worst case, they say no. That's honestly this podcast, that's kind of how I go about it. I ask great people and worst case, they say no. So why not ask? And so, but a lot of women, this is relatable to so many industries. How do you advise women who come to you, with that?
Well, what I'd say is that if you think about it, if you've ever been a boss and maybe some of the people I'm giving advice to haven't, but like you want to see people that work for you being ambitious and driven and determined, but also not pigs and be fair about things. And so I would say that, like, look, if someone has career aspirations or financial aspirations, or they want to figure out their path to be a director or a manager or a VP or whatever it is, depending on where they are, I think they need to articulate it. It's up to them to advocate for themselves. And so even if it's not about money today, if you say, listen, I'm an individual contributor, I really want to be a manager. What is it going to take for me to get there? And, I really want to see not only me learn and grow, but I'd like to see sort of my compensation. It depends on sort of, what, like, I'd like to make $50,000 a year, not $40,000 a year. What is it going to take to get there? I think have these conversations, even if they tell you no. I mean, the reality is you start putting a bug in people's ear. And also, you would probably rather, as a manager, hearing people, especially if they do it in a productive way, say, I am driven, I'm ambitious, I want to prove myself, I want to work hard, I want to make everyone in the organization successful, versus the person that's like, yes, thank you, I'll kind of keep my head down. So I would say, like, believe me, it's like, it's never hurts to ask. It's how you ask.
I really like that framework that you just gave, because in a way, it's not necessarily asking. It's more just sharing, like, these are my goals, right? Like, help me get there. How do I get there? But it's a little bit before saying, like, I want to raise or I want to become this. So I think that's great. I really like that.
And by the way, what it does is it then puts the ownership on you and your boss, not just you. So It's not like, I want to raise, you need to give it to me. It's like, help me figure out how I can get to the next level. What do you think I should do? And are there steps that I should take? And can we revisit them in 6 months?
Right. Because I think it's very common, probably most common, to just keep it in my little brain, for 2 years, saying, this is my goal. I know my goal and I'll try my hardest to get there. But you're right. Like, bringing in your manager can actually help so much with that. That's great. So, Mandy, ultimately, you leave Match Group. But one part that I really want to talk about is you've had, health scares from like we said, your mom passed away with cancer, and then you got tested for the same BRCA gene and was tested positive. But what's so powerful about this, and you could talk about it, is you kind of embodied this value to be very open with Match Group, with the people you work with, about what you're going through. Tell me a little bit about that power and what that ultimately did for, like, the culture of a company and why it's important.
I mean, the first thing is, just to be clear, I am a little bit of an open book, so it helps. I've always been that way, so I don't have a lot of secrets. So that personality helps versus some people are more guarded. But the challenge that we had at Match is that it was a hard charging, operating day-to-day, in and out kind of business. And we were all in Dallas. We actually had daily stand-ups where we'd physically be together. It's funny to think about now. We're like, what are the numbers? What do we do? What are the bugs? And so it was a 10-minute meeting, but we had them every day. We did it in the beginning every day to kind of change behavior, mostly because people were like, well, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what she's doing. And I was like, no more finger pointing. We are going to I was like, literally, people, we are going to get together every day and no one's going to ever have an excuse for not knowing unless they don't show up. So anyway, so we had that sort of culture. And then going back to kind of the health scare. So my mom, my aunt, my grandmother, my great aunt all died of, well, we're not sure if some of the generation, but ovarian cancer or reproductive health sort of related cancers connected to the BRCA gene, which creates a very high propensity for breast cancer, like 90%, and a high propensity for ovarian cancer. And so because no one in my family lived past 61-ish, it was very much, present. And when I was at Match, I actually found out that I was BRCA positive. And I give a lot of credit to my boss at the time, who had a very good female friend who was fighting cancer. And he kind of said to me, well, you're no good to me, Dad. You need to, like, figure this stuff out, which was his sort of way of saying, like, actually, go take care of yourself. Like, we'll be fine. Like, it doesn't matter. We'll cover for you. Don't be worried about taking care of this. It's really important because you do not want to get cancer. I felt like I had to tell people because I was disappearing for a few weeks. And then I had to tell people that I didn't have cancer because it's weird to be like, I'm going to go and have a mastectomy. And people are like, oh my God, she's dying. I was like, no, I'm actually not dying. This is preventive. And so I made a decision mostly because I just felt it was so weird to not say anything, to just be really transparent. And I do remember waking up after my mastectomy and like Shar was by my bed. I was like, hello. I mean, it's like the first person's face I saw. And and I got back to work pretty quick, mostly because I just didn't want to think about how much pain I was in. And people thought I was crazy, but I'm like, no, no. I mean, you want me to be laying at home versus like sitting at a computer? I'd much rather be here at a computer. I think that what happened is it gave people permission to just talk about these things in a way that they didn't. And I don't remember if I shared this story, but there was a incredible woman. She's still at Match. She's she's in the marketing, one of the big buyers. She's responsible for all of our acquisition costs, or a big portion of our acquisition costs. And she ended up having premature twins, like really premature twins. And we were supposed to be meeting, and she had called me and she said, I'm having an emergency. My water just broke. I was like, what? Like, just, take care of yourself. And I said to her, I remember she called me, I don't know, like, I can't remember, a week later. And I said, you know what? It doesn't matter. Like, we were still a pretty small company. I was like, don't worry about any of the paperwork. Don't worry about anything. Just like, you guys are in survival mode. Just focus on your family. And I was serious. It went a long way for her. I'm not sure most companies would have done that. She actually talks a lot about how like she just got incredible support. To me, is obvious. I was like, of course, she was an amazing contributor and friend and old colleague, and of course she would do that. I don't think people necessarily do that in companies. And it also is harder the bigger you get to how do you sort of manage such a big workforce when it comes to like health? But what it did do is all these things allowed us to be like more vocal about our personal lives and not feel like we have to hide anything. And if we have a sick kid, or if we have a surgery, or if we have stuff we have to deal with, that's just part of life. Because we were spending most of our days with each other and at work.
What I love about it most is it's like what you said towards the end, where you have to bring in personal in a way because you're spending so much time, right? And I don't know who I heard this from, but it's almost like bringing your whole self to work instead of bringing, one little element of yourself. And it seems like you embodied that, and it trickled down into the team, which, in my opinion, I think really translates to, outcomes, and, how you are together contributes to that.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, I know I've said this before. I just feel like if every consumer internet product was run by a mom, that we probably have different outcomes. And I do think that like we ran the company like we were moms, because we were. And by the way, we would think about like our users and our female users, and the fact that we have like daughters that were using the product. And I just think that in most cases, men are running consumer internet products that women are using, and that, over time it'll change.
Because moms have that, it's a natural instinct. Is that why, or why? Why do you think is the biggest reason moms can make the best CEO of a consumer tech?
I mean, I think women are great web thinkers, and I think they're great leaders. And so I think that over time, it's kind of like with doctors. I think 50 years ago, there was like less than 10% women doctors, and now they're over 50%. I think it's just a matter of time and opportunity. I mean, we see sort of the numbers of women going, being, going to university versus men. I mean, over time, we will take over over time. I mean, but no, I'm a big fan of men. I shouldn't say that. But I do think that, we internalize. I mean, I worried a lot about the women on the platform, and I worried, and I think it's because like I think about it like I'm a mom. Like, are we really doing the right thing for our customers? Are we really doing the right thing for our employees? And so part of that is that, I mean, frankly, probably maternal instincts kick in.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mandy, I could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to ask you questions that I typically end off each episode with. So first, what's a craft that you're spending a lifetime honing?
That's a good question. Can I tell you, like, I love being an athlete so much. And I feel like since was a public company CEO, I've had more joy and more fun learning new sports than I ever imagined in my life. I mean, I've always loved, being out on a field or on a court, and I get to go do that again, which seems silly, but it brings me immense joy.
What's the latest? What's or at least current sport that you're learning?
I never played tennis, and I picked up tennis a few years ago, and I love it. And then I was always a soccer player, so I never played racket sports. So I didn't play padel and pickleball. And so I'm so competitive, as we talked about, and movement and competition is amazing. And then I also love skiing. So, but I would say that like being on a court with a group of people and a team is a blast, or clinics is a blast. I don't really have much time for like truly organized sports, but it's fun.
I love it. I love it. Mandy, it has been such a pleasure having you on She Leads. Thank you so much for joining. This has been great.
Thanks, Carly.